Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to Work in Progress. So joining me today is our guest, Manuela Pauer. Manuela is a career and life happiness coach. Hi Manuela, welcome to the show.
Hello Joanna, very nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here with us. I'd love if you could tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do.
Sure. As you mentioned, I'm a career and life happiness coach, and I help people to create a career and a life that they love. So I do that either by some people who are feeling like they're not quite in the right career, but they don't know what else they want to be doing. I help them discover the ideal career that they want to be in. Or they might be in the right career, but there might still be something that is having them not feel fulfilled. So I help them to figure out what is getting in the way and how to get there.
Great. And what inspired you to pursue this line of work?
I used to work in the corporate world, actually. I started out in strategy consulting and then worked for various internet companies, from startups to really large companies. And while, I was doing product management, I was doing strategic planning, and it all looked great on paper, but I wasn't feeling quite fulfilled. Something was missing for me. And I really had to go on this journey of self-discovery to figure out what was missing for me. And what I wanted to be doing instead, because I had no idea at the time. So really through this journey of figuring that out, I realized the big piece that was missing for me was the sense of meaning or purpose.
Yeah.
And so, I realized I had to figure that out for myself, what that was, because I had no idea at the time. So it really led me onto this journey of, figuring this out for myself. And it led me to becoming a coach. And now I really help people who were in a situation probably a lot of times where I was, of trying to figure out what they really want to be doing that is more meaningful and fulfilling to them.
Yeah, awesome. And do you often find that you can relate to some of the stories of the people you work with?
Absolutely. Because there's so many things I think that a lot of people are feeling who are working in the corporate world. And everything from, really this figuring out what am I supposed to be doing to also at work. What really contributes to me feeling like, yes, I'm meant to be doing this work. And also I'm feeling comfortable doing this work. I'm feeling productive doing this work. I feel like I'm very effective in doing this work. So, I think a lot of times we have all been there where we've been grappling with some of those questions.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of those big questions, right? Like, what am I going to do with my life? Like, what's my purpose? And exactly. I feel like you could get lost in doing something that you don't want to do for the sake of, an income or something like that, as opposed to pursuing something that really makes you feel passionate. And yeah, I feel like it's going to be really interesting to dive into today's topic and even just chat a bit about that and like life purpose as well. So before we dive into all of that, we have a section called Have You Met Manuela Pauer? So here we just get to know you a bit better. So my first question for you is, what is your favorite book, or do you have one?
It's really hard because I love reading. So there's so many books that I've read over the course of time. I think I wouldn't be able to just pick one. When I was younger, I grew up in Germany. So a lot of authors were like Erich Kästner, Hermann Hesse, Astrid Lindgren, who had a lot of wonderful books that they wrote that I really enjoyed. But I'm part of a book club now. And it's, which is one way to do reading for fun, right? I read a lot of nonfiction books for work, all related to personal growth and so on. But it's really hard to make time to read just books for fun. So I figured out that joining a book club would hold me accountable towards actually get me to read different books that I otherwise might not pick up. So a recent pick, that was one of my picks, was Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting, which actually is a kind of fun book. It's by Claire Pooley, and it's very humorous. And it's all these people who are on a commute, based in Britain, and they meet each other randomly while they're on the subway, and they come together, and actually, friendships develop, and there are a lot of topics around ageism and friendships and relationships that come up. So it's really, really wonderful for discussion. So I really enjoyed that book. But as I'm talking, actually, another book popped into my mind, and that's related to the topic today in terms of productivity. And that book is called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. It's Time Management for Mortals. And what I really love about that, I know it's a really interesting title. What I love about the book is that it's a productivity book, but it's not about just like, here are all the tips for making you more productive, but it's actually leads to topics such as, what is really important in life and what do you want to be doing with your life. And the author, Oliver, I think he was struggling with productivity, as many of us are, and was trying to figure out all the best tools on how to be more productive, only to realize that we use all these to-dos in order to avoid something, actually. So we just fill our agenda with, all these to-do lists and all these things we could be doing, all these tasks, but really it's to escape something. And so if we weren't doing that, then we could really release many of these items on our to-do list and really focus on just a few items that really matter to us and really focus on those and do those well. So I really like that idea and that message, and I think it rings very true for me.
Yeah, and while you were talking, it reminded me of this quote I read a bit ago, and I can't remember it exactly, but it was along the lines of, the things you should be doing are the things you aren't doing. And it's a really short quote, but it really just reminded me of how we often put off the things that we know we should be doing with easier things that may not be as fulfilling, but they're just easier and they're a distraction from the important things we know we should be doing, and that can really push us to be better versions of ourselves, but we don't do it.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the hardest things, right? We procrastinate on those items. And then, oftentimes, even though they're so important, they don't get done.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's another point for us to dive into later today as well.
Yes.
My next question for you is, what is a movie that you've recently enjoyed?
I don't watch a lot of movies. I recently saw Dune Part 2, which happened to be playing, and it was actually really well done. I enjoyed it. It was a really long movie, but I think it was just beautifully done, right? Beautiful landscapes, great acting, and I really enjoyed the development of the characters too. It's leading up to Part 3, so we shall see, but it's almost this evolution of this character who means really well and wants to do the best for his people and his world. Yet, as the movie goes on, it seems like the direction that it takes, right? It's almost like, is this really the best for the people? Is this really the best, for the world that he lives in? And becomes more questionable. So, but I think a lot of times we see people as, oh, this is a good person or this is a bad person. And then in real life, it's not so clear cut, right? It's we might have good motivations, but then we don't know where that leads to, depending on what happens to us in our lives.
Yeah, certainly. And I have heard that movie is really great, and the cinematography is just beautiful in it. I personally haven't watched it yet because I'll have to watch the first one, and that'll be 6 hours that I have to catch up on altogether. But I'll get there one day. But thank you so much for sharing that.
Just put it on your calendar.
Oh yeah. I thought you were going to say put it on ×2 speed. You know how you can increase the speed of movies?
No.
That could be one way to do it.
I think that would be very confusing.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe we won't do that. Awesome. Well, I've got a couple more questions here for you. My next one is, are you listening to any podcasts at the moment?
The one podcast I am listening to right now it's called Retire with Style. So now that I've entered my 50s, I'm starting to think about retirement and really in terms of financial matters. I realized there are probably a lot of things that I want to learn to prepare myself to make sure I'm on the right track and so on. And I really love that podcast because it's very conversational style with the co-hosts. And really things I explained in a very simple but good way, where it really makes sense, and it seems to be good information. So that's the latest one I've gotten into.
Oh, I love that. And I love how there are so many different podcasts out there. You can find one for like every stage of life that you're in. I remember a guest recommended one to me the other day, and they were like, I'm in my 30s and I'm listening to this podcast about being in your 30s. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. There's like something for everyone, which I love.
Absolutely. Yes, it's great.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I've got one last question here, and that is, do you have a role model or anyone you look up to?
So that one was a hard question as well, because with role models, oftentimes it's someone you haven't met, so you don't really know them. So that being said, sort of as the qualifier, I really admire Brené Brown.
Yeah.
And what I really appreciate about her is that she's so open and she's so willing to be vulnerable and sharing her story and what she has been through, and her intent of, really all helping us to understand ourselves better and to embrace and love ourselves more, I think is something that really resonates with me. So, I love her books. I love hearing her speak and talk. She's such a powerful speaker too. And I haven't met her, so I don't know all aspects of her, but from what I'm seeing and hearing, I really, really admire her.
Yeah, and that's a really good person to look up to. I remember so many people have recommended reading Brené Brown's books to me, and I recently read Rising Strong, and she, like you said, she's so open. Like, she shared a lot about her personal relationships, and it really helps you like relate to her, and it makes, people who are like more famous seem more normal, because, sometimes famous people don't really seem normal. They're like on a different level to everyone else. But this just really like humanized her and the human experience, which was really great.
Yeah, absolutely. Because oftentimes we feel like, these role models or people who are so famous, they're perfect in some way. And, really she dispels that notion that, no, we're all human. We all are grappling with very similar questions.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love that. That's so special. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Sure.
Let's dive into our topic for today. So, talking about procrastination, I feel like we all have this idea of what it is, but how would you define procrastination?
I would define it simply as postponing something unnecessarily, or delaying something unnecessarily.
Yeah, and I love how you added the unnecessarily bit, because it's not just delaying something for like the sake of it. It's like we're delaying it for no reason kind of thing. And like, we don't need to be delaying it, but we are. So I would love to dive into like, why do we procrastinate?
Yes. So it's really interesting, because what lies at the heart of it is really our inability or unwillingness to feel certain emotions. Really, procrastination is our coping mechanism. It's when there are really negative emotions that are coming up for us, that get created by certain tasks that we have to do. And we're trying to not feel those emotions. We're trying to avoid them. And that's why we procrastinate. That's really at the heart of it. So those feelings can come from, all sorts of different things. It can come from perfectionism. We're afraid of failing. And I have an example I can walk through, maybe that will make it a little clearer. So let's say,
I love that.
Good. So let's say there's Jane, and Jane has to create a presentation. So as she's just even thinking about creating this presentation, a lot of different thoughts cross her mind. So she might be thinking like, oh, I don't know where to start, or oh, I don't know if I can do this, or what if I make a mistake in creating this? So as she's thinking these thoughts, also sorts of different emotions come up for her. And these may be emotions of discomfort or anxiety, maybe some self-doubt. And she's very uncomfortable feeling those kind of feelings, right? These are not positive emotions in her mind. So she is trying to avoid these emotions and is thinking like, oh, let me just go ahead and check my social media instead. Or let me clean my desk right now, this moment. Or look at this funny dog video that I just found. Yeah. So this brings some relief, right? As she's like, okay, I don't have to worry about this and think those thoughts and feel those feelings. But this relief is very temporary, because soon enough, a number of new thoughts are going to enter her mind. And they're going to be, now she's going to think, oh my God, I can't believe I started on this yet. I really, really need to get started on this. And I'm such a procrastinator.
Yeah.
So this brings more feelings again of maybe anxiety, discomfort, self-doubt, or frustration. So to escape these feelings, she procrastinates some more. And this cycle just continues and continues on until usually there is a hard deadline. The presentation is due tomorrow. Okay, so now she has no choice but to do this. So she sort of releases her perfectionism and everything else that was going through her mind, and she just gets it done. And that's usually kind of at the heart of it. We really procrastinate because we usually try to avoid feeling those feelings.
Yeah. And do you think it's better to confront those feelings as opposed to avoid them? Or is there a way to sort of like balance it where you don't have to like confront them in their entirety, but you can sort of manage it in a better way?
Really both. I think approaching them both ways makes sense. So first of all, in terms of emotions, yes, I think it is actually, a lot of it is about emotional intelligence. And it's about being aware of our emotions, and then how do we manage our emotions? So in order to have emotional intelligence, we first of all have to be aware of what the emotions are. And I think that's sometimes really hard, because this whole process I just described with Jane, for ourselves, we sometimes don't even realize what's happening. Before we know it, we're just like off on social media and look at funny videos, and we don't know what happened, right, in the process, like why we're doing that. So the first step is really recognizing, like, wait, what happened? Was there a thought in my head that started this, and then what were the feelings that I felt as I was having that thought? And if we can figure out what that feeling is, we can actually, yes, let ourselves feel that feeling. Because rather than escaping it, can we sit with that discomfort of that feeling? So let's say we're feeling some anxiety, right? There are really two questions I feel like that are good in terms of asking ourselves. What is happening right now? Meaning, what am I feeling right now, right? So for anxiety, it might be I'm feeling some tightness in my stomach. Okay, second question, can I be with it? Simply be with it. And it's just allowing ourselves to actually feel that tightness in our stomach. And then we do that a few times, right? Like, okay, what is happening right now? And then maybe there's a different feeling, different emotion, or maybe it's the same one. Maybe the tightness, the tightening, and the tightening has now changed to feeling like, there's a heavy stone in my stomach. Okay, second question again, can I be with it? And it's just repeating that to actually allow ourselves to be with it rather than escaping it, that I think is really important in managing our emotions. So that's one important piece. Then, in addition to that, to your point, there are other things that we can do as well. And that first thought that I described, that usually pops into our head, right? Like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do this. This is such a big presentation. I don't know if I will do it well. These are all thoughts that I call thoughts of our saboteurs that sabotage us. It's kind of like our inner critic, right? Who's really hard on ourselves. And we have another voice available to us. We sometimes don't realize it, but it's the voice of our inner champion. And it's the exercise becomes recognizing first what the saboteur voice is saying, and then finding out what our inner champion would say instead. So, for example, our saboteur might say, "Oh my God, this project is so big and it's so important," and our champion might say, "Well, I can just take one small step." Or the saboteur might say, "This has to be perfect." Well, the champion would know that, this could just be a first draft that I'm creating. It doesn't have to be the end product yet. Or the saboteur might say, "Oh, I should have started earlier on this." Well, the champion says, "Well, I can acknowledge myself for getting started now." So, you get a little bit of a feel for those two voices. The saboteur is, very critical, judgmental. We're very hard on ourselves, all based in fear. The champion is very compassionate and understanding, still wants us to do well, right? Wants us to get into action and getting things done. But the way they're going about doing that is in a way that doesn't have us, feeling like we need to escape and try to do something else. So that practice, I feel, can really help us as well in terms of coping with this feeling of I need to do and go and procrastinate now.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting you brought up emotional intelligence, because I think there's this kind of like idea that emotional intelligence is the ability to compartmentalize your emotions and feelings and pick and choose what you feel, despite that one lingering feeling is there, but you're like, no, I don't want to feel that. So I'm going to feel something else. And the ability to actually sit with certain emotions that are there and certain ideas and thoughts is actually a really great sign of emotional intelligence, that you know how to sit with them as opposed to just avoiding those things. So I think that's really great how you brought up that point.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a big issue, not just with procrastination, but just in general, that we don't tolerate discomfort very well. And as a result, we go off and, we do all sorts of things rather than sitting with discomfort, and has all sorts of repercussions for us in our life and in our career.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like it actually hinders our productivity, because by not sitting with those emotions, we're like delaying our ability to move on from, I don't know, that thought, that emotion, that feeling, whatever. And it makes another future problem for us to have to deal with, as opposed to getting that out of the way and like stepping into whatever that's, coming your way or anything like that. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. It's really just a not logical, right? It's just a knee-jerk reaction in the moment that we engage in. It's not like we're logically saying that, oh yeah, it makes sense, I should be procrastinating on this, right?
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of people think procrastination is like a part of their personality. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm such a big procrastinator. Like I've got this thing I need to do, but I'll take like 2 weeks to do it because that's just who I am. How can we break out of this habit of thinking that procrastination is ingrained into our routine and who we are?
Well, it's interesting because I have a little story here, I think, from my own experience. I think procrastination started really early for me at a very young age in elementary school, where I probably could have said like, yeah, see, I was even doing it back then, where we had projects due. And in my mind, if something was due, let's say on a Friday, then I should turn it in on Friday. And in my mind, there was no benefit in turning anything in early. And my mother tried to tell me that, no, right, you should be working on things ahead of time and turning them in early. And I just wouldn't listen to her. So she actually took me to a parent-teacher conference and had the teacher tell me that, in fact, yes, it was good to get things done early and turn them in early, even though it wasn't due until Friday. And so she had to really, convince me, because I was very stubborn, I guess, as a child, and wouldn't listen that, yes, this is a good thing to do. But even though I learned that at an early age and people told me that it would be good, it was really hard for me to do. So I would continue to procrastinate and, do things sort of at the last minute. And it wasn't really until I started to understand why I was procrastinating that I was able to do something about it. Because in my mind, it sort of worked, right? You just kind of, have to wait until last minute, and then you sort of, work really, really hard and cram everything into it, and then you deliver something. I got something done, and from that perspective, it seemed like a strategy. However, it caused me a lot of stress and anxiety. And so once I realized there was something, what that whole process was, and it was actually something that I could do something about, that's when I started to use different strategies and tactics to sort of practice the opposite of procrastinating and the opposite of, sort of getting things done early instead.
Yeah. And I think it's so funny you brought up that point of like, why would I want to submit it early? Because I have that mentality too. I'm like, well, if there's a due date, why would I want to possibly submit it any earlier than that? And it's really interesting. So like, how do we get down to the reason why like each individual or us as individuals procrastinate? Like, how do we find our own reason for that? Because I'm sure everyone has their own unique reason for why they put things off. So how do we get in touch with that?
Yeah, I would really pay attention, right, in that moment as you are sitting down to work on that thing that you have been procrastinating on, in terms of what happens, right? Really be really, really curious, like a fascinated anthropologist, if you will, of like, okay, what is happening, right? Like what is happening as I'm, let's say, turning on the computer, right? Like opening the application or, whatever it is that would lead me to work on this project or even thinking about this project. What's happening? What's that thought? And then what's that emotion tied to it? And then that's usually the key, right? If it's anything around being worried about making mistakes, for example, then, it's probably something about perfectionism. For other people, it might be that, they're making this project too big, right, in their mind. And so then it is much more around like, no, it needs to be small steps and really manageable portions because it's too overwhelming when they think about this big thing. So I think that is the clue, right? It's like, what's that initial thought that pops into our head?
Yeah. And before you mentioned that you think you've probably been a procrastinator since you were very young, how can we identify any early warning signs or triggers to prevent people from being full-blown procrastinators when they grow up?
I mean, the sign really would be just a pattern of procrastinating on things, I think, where it just, there's project after project where things don't get done until last minute. And where, especially if it adds to a lot of stress or anxiety, or it leads to results that are not quite, there, right? Because oftentimes if you cram something in at the end, we're not able to spend as much time on it. So, it has an effect on the quality of it, of course, right? That would be another indicator. So I think there are definitely signs. I think people would know if they are procrastinating because it has been a pattern in their life. And it's not so much about like, oh my God, like, what stage am I in, right? Am I the full-blown procrastinator yet, or just the medium procrastinator? I think it is much more about like, what impact is this having on your life, right? Is this getting in the way, either through the stress and anxiety that it causes, or is it totally fine, right, and comfortable with it? And if you're totally fine, comfortable with it, probably that you don't have much incentive to change yet. But if there's anything around it where it is getting in the way, then I would say yes. There's definitely, this would be the time to actually look at the reasons why you're procrastinating.
Yeah, and I feel like, remaining accountable to procrastination really requires you to develop a lot of self-awareness. Is there any other way we can use like friends, family, other resources to help us stay accountable to our own procrastination and actually doing something about it and, implementing change?
Yes, absolutely. I think accountability helps a lot. It's definitely a key strategy that I would recommend people employ. And all it has to be is a person who you feel like you can be accountable to, right? Who you would actually listen to and where you would care if they ask, okay, have you gotten this done yet? It could very simply be a friend or a family member, but it also could be a coach who you're working with or a mentor or a teacher, right? Whoever is willing to fulfill that role for you.
Yeah, great. And I think it makes it a lot more bearable when you've got someone else by your side working with it through you and someone else who's aware of it as well. So you don't have to feel so alone or like you're the only one that feels this way. Absolutely.
Yes. And just to make it clear, you're not alone. There are a lot of us who are procrastinating. So absolutely. This is nothing to feel bad about, which is actually another thing that our saboteur does. And the saboteur makes us feel bad about ourselves. And another reason why we can tap into our inner champion to make us feel not bad, right? Make us feel like, yes, whatever happened in the past is in the past. And all that matters is from here on out what we do. So
yeah, exactly. And what do you think are some of the long-term benefits or effects of overcoming procrastination, or even like we were talking about before, like sitting with those emotions, developing that emotional intelligence?
Yes, so I think it has a number of benefits. If you're overcoming procrastination, it really means you're getting more things done. You're feeling like you're more productive. You're feeling better about yourself. So it can really boost your confidence. And the whole practice around managing your emotions better really allows you to, I think, feel more in sync with yourself, right? There's less to run from. There's less from, where you feel like there's certain things that you can't get to and you have to like go and escape from it. But you can really be with yourself and who you are. And I think that getting in touch with yourself and feeling like, yes, that is me, I can be with myself and I feel good about that. That's really priceless.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that was worded so well as well. And I feel like it would be such a great feeling to know that you're overcoming procrastination, you're stepping into yourself and the things you should be doing and the emotions you should be feeling as well.
Yes, although be careful with the word should, because it's a word that the saboteur uses oftentimes. Like we're telling ourselves, I should be doing that, right? Which is very different from I choose to do this, which is what the champion would say. So I'm always careful with that little word because it can often come from another place that pushes us into things rather than going where we want to go.
Yeah, and I like how you brought up this idea of like the champion and the saboteur. And for those of us who want to like tap into it, how can we do that,
Yes. So there are really a couple of ways. The first one is really on what I described in terms of becoming aware what the saboteur tells us and starting to develop phrases or things that our champion would tell us instead. That's really one way, right? And, really as you go through the day, just start noticing, right? When are times when you're critical of yourself, judgmental of yourself, when you're hard on yourself? What are you telling yourself? Those are saboteur things, right? If you were going to talk to your best friend, what would you say instead as the champion, right? So our saboteur throughout the day might tell us like, why did you do that, right? Like, you didn't do that very well. Why are you so late on that, right? Like all those thoughts are saboteur thoughts. But how would you talk to your best friend? Is that what you would say to your best friend on a daily basis? No, you would probably say like, hey, okay, this was a little bit late. What can we do next time so it isn't so late? Or in terms of, okay, well, why did I do this? But from a place of curiosity, not, blaming. So it's, really starting to treat yourself as a best friend instead.
Yeah.
And the second way to getting in touch with our champion is really from a brain, our rational part of the brain, but more from our body and our experience. And that's where it ties into the emotions. It is the more we allow ourselves to really feel what is going on, the more we can get in touch with our champion. And to go really deep, there are different modalities actually that are somatic practices, that are body-based practices that allow us to tune into what we're feeling, what's going on, and really be there with stuff that is happening. And those practices are immensely useful in helping us get in touch more with our champion.
Yeah,
amazing. But as a simple starting point, one way to even start practicing, I think the champion viewpoint would be to acknowledge yourself on a regular basis. So nice exercises at the end of the day, write down 5 things that you acknowledge yourself for. So acknowledging yourself, meaning, you give yourself credit for these things. You pat yourself on the back for these things. Because oftentimes what we do, especially with to-do lists and so on, is at the day we think about all the things we didn't get done, right? Like, oh, there were all these things I was trying to get to, I didn't get them done. This is the opposite. It's like acknowledging ourselves for all the things that we did do during that day. And it doesn't matter if they're big or if they're small, but getting to this practice of acknowledging rather than criticizing ourselves.
Yeah. And along the lines of like practices and habits, is there a specific practice that you use personally to combat procrastination?
Yes, absolutely. So from that exercise that I mentioned of identifying what the saboteur tells you when you're first procrastinating, and gets you to procrastinate. When you come up with what the champion would tell you instead, so for example, the saboteur is saying like, oh my God, this project is so big, right? The champion would be like, all you have to do is take one step. It's capturing those phrases and then picking one that's sort of your go-to, that whenever you're starting that task, you can go to that phrase. So for me, I love all I have to do is do this one little thing, right? So whatever it is, whether it's a presentation I have to do or any project or whatever, I tell myself, all I have to do is open up the Word application and type one sentence. That's all I have to do. And it gets me going because I can open up the Word app and I can write one sentence, right? That's usually, that's usually not that scary. And knowing that will get me going is what I tell myself. So come up with that phrase for yourself, whatever it is, what your champion can tell you to just take one little step, to do one little thing. So that's a big one. And then another practice I really love is it's kind of a 2-minute habit. And I think this was developed by a productivity guru, David Allen, who came up with this practice of, if there's any task that takes less than 2 minutes to do it right away. And it gets you into the habit of getting things done rather than thinking like, oh, I'll get that done later. So for example, could be, after dinner, like do the dishes right away rather than leaving them in the sink. Or when you get a bill, pay the bill right away rather than thinking like, okay, I'll pay that bill later. It's, picking those little things that really, take a very small amount of time to do, getting to this habit of getting them done. And it really creates this momentum where you're like, I'm a person who gets things done rather than I am a person who procrastinates, right? And starts getting that habit.
Yeah, exactly. And how do you think implementing these practices in your life has changed your perception of productivity and what it means to you?
Well, I definitely had a positive effect. I don't know. It's a bigger question on what it means for productivity. So let me take those questions in two parts, I guess. So first, I think in terms of the practices, they've really helped me get things done earlier, which has really decreased the amount of anxiety and stress that I felt in doing things. So that has been really nice because, that is just like unnecessarily negative emotions you have to deal with, right, on a regular basis. And still, right, I still have to practice this. It doesn't come necessarily automatically. But, every time I'm able to get things done earlier, right, it's almost a sense of relief, like, I'm able to get that done. The part with productivity, I think I'll come back to, it's more along the lines of the Oliver Burkeman book, the 4,000 Weeks. I think what is much more important rather than in terms of productivity of like getting all these different things done and being able to, check 100 things off your to-do list and, feeling really productive that way. It's the importance of getting the really meaningful, important things done in our life. And I think focusing on that, right? And oftentimes these might be things that we're procrastinating on because they're really important to us and they seem so big. But I think that is where, that's the important part, right? It's not productivity. It's nice to be productive, but being productive on the things that really matter, that's, I think, where the sweet spot is.
Yeah, I can definitely agree because I feel like if I checked off 10 little things in the moment, I would be like, wow, that's a lot of things I've just checked off. That feels great. But I would forget about that within the hour. But if I did something that means a lot to me and I've been really wanting to do this one thing and I check that off and I've finally done it, even though it's one thing compared to those 10 little things, I feel like that would have a greater impact on how I feel about myself and how I feel about, my own productivity in general as well.
Absolutely. Yes. I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing all those strategies with us and what works for you as well. I'd love to jump into our open mic section now, where I'm just going to hand it over to you and it's a chance for you to just talk about anything that you would like to.
All right. So let's see. In terms of topics, one topic I've been thinking about it's this topic of our relationship that we have with ourselves. It's sort of a topic that keeps on coming up with me as I work with people because I feel like ultimately a lot of different things keep on coming down to this relationship that we have with ourselves. What is that relationship like? And it sort of ties back again to the saboteurs or the champion, right? Are we being really hard on ourselves? Are we really critical of ourselves, judgmental of ourselves on a regular basis? Or are we, treating ourselves like we would treat a good friend, right? Are we being nice to ourselves and encouraging to ourselves? And I think it makes a big difference in how we approach life, how we approach work, and in terms of how we get things done. how we relate to other people. It just has an impact on so many different areas in our life. And when I first started out in coaching, I actually started with this topic in mind of fall in love with yourself, fall in love with your life. And I really truly believe, that is sort of part of my purpose, tying it back to purpose and why I'm doing things. When I first started training as a coach, there were different exercises we went through in the training, and one of them was to determine your purpose. And as I was trying to figure out what my purpose was and starting to refine it, it kept on getting refined more and more to exactly that. It's to fall in love with myself and my life, and then helping other people fall in love with themselves and their lives. And that's what it really boils down to. Now, that can take many different forms, right? And in terms of what area of their life people are focusing on, different kind of challenges in their career and in their life. But ultimately, right, when it comes down to it, it's about that. How is our relationship with ourselves? Yeah. And I think it comes from, when I was younger, I had a really loud saboteur. I was really hard on myself, very critical of myself. And I mentioned I grew up in Germany. I'm half Japanese, I'm half Austrian. And I grew up in Germany back when it wasn't very diverse. So in terms of feeling how I felt about myself, I think, that was probably part of the reason too of, feeling like I belonged or fit in was hard. I definitely felt different. And so from that perspective, I think it was very challenging to not have a little bit of that judgment against myself. And then it sort of continued as I went on and grew up. And it wasn't really until I was an early adult when I started realizing that, how am I talking to myself? And it's really, really in this really harsh way. And that's really not right? Why am I treating myself that way? That I started creating that awareness and became aware of that. And then, again, once I was aware of it, then I could do something about it and started to change it.
Yeah, and I think that's such an interesting point you bring up, and I can definitely relate. I migrated to Australia when I was about 4 or 5, and coming to a new place that's totally opposite of the culture that you've been born into can be a bit of a shock. And especially growing up at such a young age in a new country, you feel like a bit of a sponge, just absorbing all these judgments and perceptions and all these pressures to, acclimatize to a new place. And it can really be a bit disorientating, and you feel kind of disenfranchised from yourself because you're like, who am I? Or am I supposed to be more like these people? And especially as you get older, and I'm going through this phase in my life where I'm trying to tap into my inner self and be like, who am I? And what's my relationship like with myself? Because I think a lot of people realize that it's no longer about your external relationships as much as it is about the relationship you have with yourself. Because if you're not in a place where you know who you are and how you interact with yourself, how you're supposed to interact with the world around you, and it can be really grounding to discover who you are and how your mind works and what your self-talk is like, which is so important, and then use that as a way to approach the world around you. I guess that's just my personal sort of perspective on this idea of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a fascinating topic, and it really has an impact on your relationship with others, because if you're very hard on yourself, chances are that you might be very hard on other people who are really close to you as well. And then that for sure is going to affect your relationships, right? So I feel again, it keeps on coming back to the question of how about myself first, right? What is that relationship I have with myself? And if it's not where I want it to be at, okay, how would I want that relationship to look like? How would I ideally want to talk to myself, and how would I like to treat myself? And I think it really affects the way that we interact with the world and the way that we view the world. It's sort of can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If we believe certain things about ourselves and then go out in the world collecting evidence that is true, we can kind of a cycle of see evidence, that, I'm not good enough, okay? For example. it becomes
and
self-perpetuating.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it kind of comes down to this idea of treat others how you would want to be treated. And I guess if you don't really know how you would want to be treated, how are you supposed to treat others? And I feel like if you're projecting negativity onto other people, especially those around you, there might be something within yourself that you need to resolve or figure out your relationship with yourself a bit better. Because I personally find that when I feel good about myself or when I understand myself a bit better, I understand how I can treat other people better as well.
Absolutely, yes. I teach different workshops, and one of them is how to deal with difficult people. And we oftentimes we kind of think about the topic, and we're like, yeah, that difficult person, right, who I'm dealing with. But once you think about it, who are these difficult people? Well, we all are difficult people to someone at certain times, right? It all depends. And what matters really, what makes certain people difficult, is that something triggers us. When they're saying something or when they're doing something, and it's a particular trigger for us. But that comes back to, why is that a trigger for us, right? Why is that triggering us? And that's, I think, where the self-awareness comes in, and then that self-growth of like, oh, there's something there. I got triggered. Why did I get triggered? Right? Why is that such a sore spot for me? And once we can identify that, then it's much easier in terms of relationships with other people, where we can take responsibility for our part of like, it's because I have these triggers that, I'm so sensitive when I'm talking to this person, versus, that person is difficult, right? That person is hard to deal with. I don't want to deal with that person.
Yeah, exactly. Because I feel like sometimes it can be easier to place the accountability on others to not trigger us or to not affect us in certain ways, when we're only in control of ourselves. And when we try to control others, we're trying to do the impossible. But it can be so much easier if you just project that onto yourself and be like, okay, cool. Like, why do I get triggered? Okay, I understand why I get triggered. Maybe I can, do something about that, as opposed to trying to tell that person to never say that kind of thing to me ever again, which could cause conflict or more issues.
Exactly. And of course, the caveat is, yes, there's certain types of behaviors and so on that are unacceptable, right? If someone's abusive,
100%.
Of course, right? Like, we're not talking about that. This is just, within, this generally healthy, right, relationship you have with someone else. But I think there's so much power that we actually have, right? There's so much responsibility that we can take for different things, so many things we can influence that we don't even realize, because we're just, reacting a lot of times to different things. So just with this topic of productivity and procrastination, right? Just this awareness of like, why is this happening, right? Why am I doing this? It allows us to learn more about ourselves. It's all part of that same self-awareness, and it's ultimately going to help us strengthen our relationships, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's a great way to round off for today's topic. And before we end, I'd love to ask you if you could give us one piece of advice for managing procrastination. What would that be?
Well, the one thing I can say is just keep on starting, right? Oftentimes when we procrastinate, we get into this like cycle of like, I already procrastinated on this. This is so late now, right? Like this kind of negative cycle. But if we really could get into this habit of like, no matter what happened until now, just get started now, right? Keep on starting, and with these really small steps, right? In these really small increments. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's like, all I got to do is write one sentence, right? Like all I got to do is like, open up the application. If we can get into that habit of like, no matter what, I'll start again. Didn't work out last time, right? I'll try that again. I feel like that is really the mindset that will have us keep going and get into action.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Manuela, for joining me on the show today and sharing your insights with us. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Joanna. It was really a pleasure. I really, really enjoyed it as well.
No worries. And for those of us who want to find out a bit more information about you or your work, where can we go?
So you could either go to my website, that is pauercoaching.com. Pauer is my last name. It's spelled Pauer. power.coaching.com, or you can find me on Instagram, and it's power.coaching. It's my Instagram handle.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And for those of you who missed that, don't worry. We've got all of Manuela's details down in the description below. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, pp.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.